Welcome to Cracking Legal Innovation. I'm Anthony Seal, CEO of Legaltech, and I'm joined by my co-host and our Chief Commercial Officer, Daniel Porus. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Kerry Westland. She's a partner and head of the innovation group at Addleshaw Goddard. Addleshaw are an international firm with over 1,500 lawyers in 20 offices across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, and they advise clients in over 100 countries. Kerry's at the forefront of transforming legal service delivery, leading initiatives that have seen Addleshaw recognized as Law Firm of the Year at the Lawyer Awards, most digital law firm in Europe at the FT Innovative Lawyer Awards. Today, we'll be discussing how clients can be enablers or potentially even a little bit challenging when it comes to legal tech adoption. I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion. And I'm really keen to unpack ideas like what value really means to clients, how those relationships with clients can develop in terms of bringing in innovative technology. So really, really big welcome, Kerry. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I think of innovation with clients, particularly innovation that's helping deliver things on their legal transaction, as a little bit of a collaborative journey. Would you relate to that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We can't build things in isolation and then convince clients that that's what we need to do, although we will have some ideas around it. The best impact that we've seen and the biggest impact that we've seen is where we're working together with clients on how this will work. I think it's also about honesty. That's probably the big bit for me. Collaboration about what we're doing and then being really honest about it. Probably being quite honest, it doesn't always mean dramatic cost cutting. It's probably incremental improvements through what we're doing and how we do that. But it's also being then honest about what the actual benefits are when we do this. So less admin, better visibility and things like that. And I think having those really honest conversations about what this means is what really helps sort of bring clients along with us.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of different things we can unpack there. Would you say that you are more pushing legal technology as part of your service delivery on clients, or is there a lot of pull from clients as well?
We probably see that at the relationship level a lot more than probably sometimes the day-to-day, but we are seeing clients really question how technology is being used. But then we have an innovation team of nearly 80 people who are coming up with ideas and what we do. So if clients don't know what's possible, they don't know how to ask for it. So it's sort of a bit of a two-way street, really, when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think there are plenty of law firms that 14, 15 years ago definitely didn't have innovation teams and certainly don't have innovation teams of 80 people now. And I imagine it's a huge piece building that up over that period. Do you think it's even influenced your client base and over that period changed who your clients are, or potentially they come to you with different expectations, or you find that the technology forward law firms might even approach the firm?
I think that's quite an interesting question. I'm not sure it's changed our client base, but maybe it's helped us retain our client base. So I think we've got like a really good stat of the number of FTSE 100 clients we've got, or FTSE 250, I think it might be, and how we hardly lose a client like over the years that we're doing it. So I think there are some clients, and we have a tech sector that focuses on various things, and being able to be seen to work with those clients is important. But the vast majority of our clients are the institutional clients. And I think being able to have a compelling story around innovation and our use of technology and it being shown and illustrated, I think really helps retain them. I think that's probably the biggest area.
Kerry, I'm interested in when it comes to articulating what you're doing from an innovation perspective to clients. A lot of the people within Addleshaw, like the partners who are doing the day-to-day work, have a lot of those relationships with the clients. How do you think about sort of upskilling some of them to be able to have the necessary conversations, or knowing when to pull in the innovation team to have discussions?
Yeah, we're really clear at AG that innovation isn't this thing that's done on the side. Like, you don't just have the innovation team when you want them to sprinkle some glitter over the top of stuff. It is fundamentally what we deliver, and it's a really key part of our 2030 strategy. We've got 5 pillars, and innovation is one of them. And that's saying partners and others within the firm, not just our partners, our other lawyers, all have a responsibility to think about innovation. And I remember a long time ago when Sophie Schwosh was at one of our clients, she's now back in Australia, we sat down and she was saying, I love talking to Kerry. It's really great when you bring her out and we can have a really nice conversation. She's like, but actually, to two partners in the room, I'm really interested in how you will apply this to your work. And that was quite a while ago. So we've always been really clear that our partners need to understand how to apply this, what it means for their work and how they can talk to clients about it. Because you may just be asked in a relationship meeting, what technology are you using or what's happening? And I don't think you can defer that in some ways with things. So how we upskill them is constant communication. And I think I always remember someone saying to me, you can't communicate enough. You just have to keep saying the same things over and over. We do training and we just make sure if we bring anything in, it's because our partners and our lawyers have asked for it. So it's because we've been working with them to understand those pain points. So they understand fundamentally how to apply it to their work. As we all know, it's a really fast moving space. So actually not everyone is going to have the answers. So we're always there on hand, but generally there's an expectation they'll understand how to apply it to their work.
Yeah, it's certainly something we hear from some clients is that innovation's sort of sprinkled over the top. I think it is just a huge challenge if you've got an organization of over 1,000 lawyers. The amount of communication to even tell them that something exists in the firm when the technology is constantly changing things, that's just the most enormous effort. And I slightly wonder whether because you guys have been going at it for so long and because you've been going at it so passionately, like it almost takes 15 years to go through that transformation as a firm. And I don't know, almost like the culture or the mindset of all of those partners needs to change maybe over a 15-year period.
Yeah, and I say that sometimes, when people hire in like a new innovation lead or chief innovation officer and they're like, well, it's not really working. And we're like, well, what team have you built around them? What are you doing? What investment are you putting in? Because I used to say, so we've had a new managing partner in the last 18 months. So I've spent most of my tenure with the previous managing partner. And when he finished, he was always like, if you'd said to me at the start of my managing partner role that by the end of the 10 years, we'd be having a team of the size that we've got with the investment that we're putting into it, I would have thought, what are you talking about? That wouldn't happen. But we've sort of grew together to do that. And I think that's the really important piece. Is it doesn't just happen. I think especially when generative AI came out, we had a really good platform to go, this thing that everyone's talking about, this is what it means and this is what can happen. And I think it means we've got that trust in the partnership and across the firm to be listened to around that as well. And I think that's really important. So it doesn't just happen because you hire someone into that role. There is a lot that goes into that, I think.
So you sort of note it being a journey for AG as a firm to go along over the years, but it's also a journey for the clients to adjust their sort of way of working. How do you sort of go about taking them on that journey as well with you as as you've progressed over the years?
So it's been talking to them mainly and showing them. And I remember when I first started doing this, I did a pitch with a client who we work with really, really closely now. And I was a trainee at the time. We showed them a dashboard and literally they fell off their chair. And it was like a static dashboard. You couldn't click into it. This is what was possible at the time. And now there's like this expectation of what generative AI can do. So they've come along that journey with us. But that's been constantly. And sometimes it's experimenting. It's not always going to work. You think something's going to happen and you don't quite get sort of the responses and the results that you need because it takes time. You need to refine things and being really open. I think we touched on this, but being open with clients about that and saying, we're going to test if this works. Should we see what happens and things that I think is really important.
I'd be curious for your perspective on this. I have a theory that lawyers are more scared of doing something new with the clients almost than the clients are. So as a lawyer, you're so trained to spot risk, make sure the transaction goes perfectly. And it's super scary to go and use a new piece of technology. But actually clients are more used to working in a business environment where they experiment a little bit more, where they try new things, where they're used to working with business teams in all sorts of bits of software or in different ways. And actually, the clients are more up for it than maybe some lawyers feel.
I think sometimes the people we're dealing with are lawyers in-house. Honestly, I think I sometimes get asked, are your lawyers resistant to change and all of that type of stuff? They're not, but they need to do it within the guidelines that are set by clients, which we can probably come on to, or in our regulatory responsibilities and things. If you give them the freedom to use things and do stuff and trust stuff, then absolutely they get on board. And we've seen that with some of the tools that we've had. So I think there are some aspects of clients, I think, that get it and want to do it, but there are still sometimes the barriers are the in-house lawyers as well, because they have the same responsibility to their business as we do as law firms to our clients. So I think, it's quite an interesting space and time to try and get that at the moment.
Do you find, Kerry, that there are certain clients, and it might be because of regulatory reasons, which we'll certainly be talking about some of the banks at some point and the regulatory environment there at some point in this podcast, but when are there certain clients or certain sectors that you find are better places to start from an innovation perspective if there's something new than others?
Yeah, so interestingly, from a regulatory standpoint, you wouldn't think this, but the energy companies have been really interesting people to work with. And some of our biggest matters really early on were with the energy companies around that. So they've always been really good clients to have conversations with, mainly because if you think about what energy companies are dealing with, they're at a size and scale that you probably can't deliver some of the stuff you need to do for them without technology. And the retail clients generally have been open to change. I think they have a lot of pressure from margin and things like that themselves, and again probably have a scale that it makes sense to do that with. So they're probably two of the areas where we see quite a bit of uptake on various things that we do.
I feel we've definitely seen that as well. It's, there are some clients who are just more innovatively minded, and that might be, sector that they're in. They're keen to be more experimental. I think to Anthony, to your point that you were making before, maybe if they are tech companies themselves, for example, they're more used to innovative ways of working and change and that sort of thing. The other one is where there are particular pain points that they are feeling that just necessitate technology to help improve it. So, large scale banking and finance, which has been a core use case for us, it's just so large and so complicated to try to project manage that the need for a tool like Legatix is, being really critical to sort of drive things forward. So that's actually been quite client led in order to it's almost got to a point now for certain deals, they almost feel they couldn't get the deals done, or certainly couldn't get them done within the time frame or within the budget that they need without a transaction management platform, for example. But then there might be other use cases where it would be very useful, but it is challenging just because it's a new way of working, and there might not be that critical need. It's going to be very useful. It's going to have a great outcome, but it just won't be, as much of a burning platform for change. Is that what you see?
Sometimes it feels quite binary. It's between a law firm and a client, but that's not what always happens on a deal. There are various parties you need to bring along, and the surveyors on board and other parts of the business and other advisors as well. So maybe if it is a bit more bilateral between the client and law firm, it is sometimes easier to bring something in than the wider ones. But yeah, like you said, and I saw this very early on, there are certain things that everyone wanted to solve, and it was almost like there wasn't barriers to those things. And then now it's working at those fundamental practices that no one thought technology could do, and things that we're now going, well, how could you use it? Can you push it? Is there benefits to it?
A common challenge that comes up with certain types of technology, and I know we've talked about this a lot, Kerry, in the context of Legatix, but is where clients are bought into the value of the technology. They want it used. It's, it's how when it's gone in the RFP. It's helped to get the panel, helped AG be on the panel firm to be able to use certain types of technology. But when it comes to then implementing it on the deals themselves, there are restraints. And it might be information security requirements due to the regulatory environment in which the client works in, or just internal barriers that are kind of put up on the client side. How do you navigate those situations, and how do you help to continue to drive the technology to actually be used on deals?
It's one of the toughest things, I think, for law firms and innovation is there are lots of restrictions around using technology. And I understand it. It's their data. There's a risk when it comes to it. And people are really worried about what that means. I think there's a couple of things that clients can do, and we can work with clients on those. We're starting to see some approved toolkits or guidelines. So saying, we know firms use these general tools in the market, so actually we're going to allow them within these guidelines. It's quite interesting because does it give you the opportunity to innovate with other tools, but that's something to have a think about. So maybe it's more about standards and guidelines that we should be thinking about. I think the other thing which because you guys helped with this, is vendors taking a bit of a role in this as well. We as law firms can go on an individual basis to our clients, and sometimes it's a matter by matter basis, which obviously isn't sustainable. Sometimes it's a relationship level. But I think if some of our bigger clients who have panel arrangements and 5 or 6 of their law firms want to use a particular tool, where you guys came in and did that with some of our clients and said, this is really important, what can we do? Because you as Legatic saw the benefit of getting clients to sign it off. I think that's been really helpful as well. Because otherwise we're ending up in quite an inconsistent space where someone's spoken to the right person at the client and got it signed off, and then others haven't. And I think it's really difficult as a law firm where you have half your clients saying you can use a tool on a particular piece of work, and then another half are saying that you can't. For our lawyers, that's a really confusing message to be like, this piece of work that you do, when you do it here, you can use Legatics and you can use other tools, but when you do it here, you can't. And then that just doesn't help with adoption either. So really trying to drive that consistency across the market is really important. And as I've mentioned, you guys really helped with that with some of our clients.
It's been a fascinating process to go through, trying to support a number of our customers getting clearance by some of the major financial institutions. And I think one of the most interesting things for me was one of the major, so we've thankfully been able to get that clearance by a number, sometimes formally, sometimes less formally, by some of the major financial institutions. There was one in particular, and what I found very interesting was they were bought in to the value of the platform. They wanted it to be used by all of the law firms. And we were working with the point of contact in the bank who was helping us to drive it forward. And what was really interesting is we were having to put forward a business case for them to go through an approve list process. And we were in a queue alongside it had to be the procurement team that would look at it and assess it. And we were in a queue alongside other tools that the bank is looking to procure themselves. So it becomes a really difficult process. I mean, that's sort of the formality approach. So we had to get a bit more creative around how can we instead, because that's going to take well over a year and we want to use it sooner. So were there other ways that we could do it? And I think my biggest sort of takeaway, and I suppose suggestion for firms, but I'd be keen for your thoughts on it as well, Kerry, is just utilizing those relationship catch-up meetings. To your point, you were saying have conversations, but just bring it up. Say, can we review the key technology that we think will really help you on your deals? And can we use those relationship catch-up meetings to maybe approve this list of technology that we want to use? And it seems like that's been quite an effective process.
Yeah. And I mean, you still get into, like you said, the queue of priority of what's important for that client at the time. So yeah, it's continuing to have that conversation. The other piece, which clients are a little bit like law firms in this, is what are other clients doing, and have other clients agreed that? So, and sort of helping them along that journey as well. I think the really important bit you mentioned there was clients, the teams we deal with at the clients, so the in-house lawyers and the relationship teams, absolutely you can see that they understand the value and really want to use it. And there is one in-house, one GC I was speaking to who said they absolutely put in their RFPs, I want you to use these, I want you to use tools, I want you to use technology. And then they didn't realize their procurement team had sent out a letter to their suppliers, law firms and others, to say, don't use AI, for example. And the in-house team were like, what? No, we want them to use AI. We've asked them to use AI. We need them to think about it. And I think there is a bit of a disconnect sometimes within those really large organizations around that. And we can help with that. But obviously, we can only go so far as a law firm. You can only go so far as a vendor. So that has to be the in-house teams that are doing something around that. But that is just quite an interesting space at the moment.
Be keen to maybe just talk a little bit about client value and how you sort of position that. Because obviously all these innovative solutions are brilliant. Everyone wants it. I know if I had a bunch of the technology that's now within firms, maybe I would have lasted longer within a law firm. The clients want it in terms of, greater efficiency, cost saving. Interestingly, though, I was reading like an FT report earlier in the year, and it was saying that there aren't kind of clear cost savings from some of the AI investments as of yet. So I'm just interested from your perspective, Kerry, like what do clients find the most persuasive from a value perspective? Is it efficiency? How do you position value? And what do you think is still missing there?
So I think it's efficiency. There is cost savings does come into it. And there are reasons why I think people aren't seeing the cost savings piece, which we can touch on. Data is another big piece. So actually having things, everyone talks about being data driven and making decisions being data driven, but you need the data somewhere. So actually, if you're capturing that through a deal, then that's really helpful. Transparency, having everything in one place, so they're not having to like wait for emails to go back and forth and chasing updates and various things. And then, I mean, it's often said, and maybe it's quite hard to prove, but if we're not focusing on some of the more volume scale pieces or admin or routine pieces, our lawyers are focused on some of the more strategic parts of the deal and the commercial negotiation maybe, or what's happening there. So it's some of those types of conversations that we're having. I can't deny that cost is a big thing, and literally the minute ChatGPT came out, I mean, we've been asked this question over all of the years, like what's technology doing, how is it saving time, and therefore cost. I think it's always been a bit incremental before. The technologies we had, they moved the needle, don't get me wrong, and they've been really good. And I look at where we were when people were falling off their chairs at dashboards to where we got to just before ChatGPT came out. But obviously, generative AI has changed that conversation a bit more. And literally from that November, it was like, what does this mean for our fees? What's going to happen? We are seeing success in some places where it's like, well, actually, we can get this to you in a timescale that was never possible before. So therefore, that's a real benefit to you. It means that maybe if we're doing a lease, you can get your shop open and you've got profits coming in before it happens, or you had a regulatory timescale and it wasn't possible to do that before without the tools. So some of those conversations are quite interesting as well, but it does then go back to the value billing conversation. And I think this is a two-way conversation that needs to happen, because how do you decide how much something is worth to you as an in-house lawyer? And I think everyone's so used to pegging it to the hourly rate that it's really, really hard to get away from. As much as everyone says they want to get away from it, we still get asked, give us a fixed fee, but then tell us your hourly rate, so that everyone is like re-engineering what the cost may have been.
So to summarize, you say like there's been some cost savings as a result of things like generative AI coming in, but the cost of the technology and having to keep a lot of humans in the loop still mean that you haven't necessarily quite seen the value savings that maybe clients expect. Are they the big factors?
Yeah. And we're still trying to work out the accuracy, the trust, and all of that. Within that, there's a lot of setup to get it right, and then there's a lot of cost on the usage, and that all comes into the sort of factor. Don't get me wrong, we are absolutely seeing in really like certain circumstances where you can say, if we'd done this manually, this is what this would have looked like. But we're also having conversations about risk and liability within that as well, because we're like, well, actually, if you want us to run things through a generative AI tool and you're just going to take the output, then what does that look like from a risk, liability, and cost perspective? I think that it's not this magic solution that's suddenly cutting everything in half. And even if it did cut it in half, what's the value that you're prepared to pay for that? And that's the piece that I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it looks magic and it looks like it's done all the work in one go, and that maybe creates that expectation there. I find it really interesting around like what is the value to the client, because I think a lot of internal legal teams are very much, they are a cost center and they're measured on like external spend, they're measured on how much they're spending on law firms. There are other results, like if you get a deal done faster, so if you get your financing deployed 3 months earlier, or if you start construction of your shopping center or power station like 4 months earlier or something, if you look at like the value to the business, like that can be absolutely enormous, because I don't know, your shopping center's getting all this lease revenue like 4 months earlier or something. You add up like, what's that worth? Because I don't know, legal processes take a long time, but I think it's quite rare that maybe internal teams are actually like KPI'd on, I don't know, how quickly did you manage to help the commercial teams, but the impact to the business is huge. So you end up having conversations a little bit more around like costs, costs can we get this, but actually like, if we can get this deal, if it's the same cost, but we get the fund deployed 3 months.
It makes me think of the conversation we had with an aviation leasing, like the team there, which are partially legal, partially commercial, but they were literally restrained by the number of deals they could do per year. They can't get more headcount. So they're literally restrained by how fast they can do their deals. And yes, they'll do some with external lawyers, they'll do some themselves, but if they can do the deals faster, if they can do it cheaper with their law firms, they can literally increase their output. And that is good for everyone involved. And I think it's sometimes finding those win-wins, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a net, someone has to lose in that outcome. Everyone can potentially win.
Is it a large organization problem where the legal team is just so much seen on these kind of metrics around cost and actually they're not sufficiently connected with the commercial teams?
I think we're just so used to badging it to the hour, and actually you want there's always a conversation about what our actual hourly rate is as well. It's like it's going up, and it's like, yeah, it's going up because everything's going up. Like it's wages are going up, costs are going up. So actually you're probably never going to cut your law firm's hourly rate. Maybe we'll use less of those hours, and that's where you'll start to see various things. So I think it's just quite an interesting conversation that we've never really had the ability to go, because so if you take an M&A deal, you never know what you're going to uncover in the DD. And it's like when you see on the TV programs when people are doing builds and they find a sewer under like the thing that they're trying to build, and then suddenly you've got to pay for a specialist to come and have a look at it and things. You might find that in DD, but then I know clients don't like it when you find things in DD that's going to cost more money. So that's why it's always been this really hard space to go, this is how much it should cost. I think you can do phases of things, and that's where we should get to with it. But I think you're doing DD to understand whether you want to buy that company or not. And if you find asbestos in your roof, then you need a specialist to have a look at the asbestos. So I think those are quite interesting conversations. And taking the building analogy even further, I think when you get tradesmen to come and quote to plaster your room or paint your room, you as a customer have probably decided how much you want to pay already, and you've got a bit of an idea of that value. And you'll get quotes that are like all over the place sometimes, but you've decided how much you want to pay for that because you've put that value on you. And I think that probably needs to translate into some of the work that happens, because sometimes clients will be like, well, I wasn't expecting that price. And we're like, well, what price were you expecting? And actually, if we know the price you're expecting, what can we do within that price to get this through? I think, can we do a spot check? Like, can we run, if we're doing DD, can we run AI over all of the contracts, but we'll spot check the really important questions in the top 100 rather than looking at all of them? We could probably do that within the price you were expecting. And those are some of the conversations I think we need to have.
So using that due diligence analogy, something that I thought was very interesting, this was years ago now, when some of the AI tools were being, early on being deployed for due diligence. But I suppose my starting assumption, as maybe is the case for a few others, was it would reduce the number of hours that were spent by the lawyers doing due diligence. And in fact, what came up from a couple of the firms was actually saying it was opening up new revenue streams to a degree, because, I remember when I was an M&A lawyer, you'd have the discussion at the beginning about what's your materiality threshold and which contracts are you actually going to review. And that's then ultimately a risk decision for the client to decide, what are the most important contracts? Maybe it's also some named contracts, but which ones are going to get human eyes over, because it's not going to be cost effective to look over every contract. Whereas with the AI tools, what some of the firms I was speaking to were saying is they could now offer, in addition to the human eyes review over contracts worth more than, let's say, $1 million, they'll actually put everything, literally everything, through the AI. And if it flags up certain things, then there'll be another review that can be done on things that are flagged there. And I thought that's really interesting. That was really interesting then. Is this a trend that you've seen in terms of it opening up new revenue streams and conversations around value with the client?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, and it's very much in that space. It's like, are we going to spot check? Are we going to do the full piece? And what becomes really interesting, so I was having quite a good conversation with a GC about M&A deals and what the future of diligence and what AI is going to do to that and various things. And the interesting bit for me is, like you were just saying there, Dan, like, when you're trying to get the deal done, you just want the deal. The deal needs to be done. And the corporate teams at the client and the corporate teams in the law firms are like, what do we need to do and how do we get it? And we're going to look at the top 100 contracts. But if you're buying a company and you've looked at the top 100 contracts, but there's like 10,000, when that company is then integrated into your new business, where's the data for the 10,000 contracts? And actually then the commercial teams and the commercial management teams in the client who've now bought this business are going, well, it would have been really good to have got the data when we were doing the reviews of all of those things. So actually, can you use the due diligence process now that we've got, and this isn't to charge like loads and loads more, but now we've got the ability to look over things a bit more, to have more data when you want to then integrate that business. And I think those are some of the really interesting conversations to have. And we absolutely know clients have wanted to solve things like contract management for so many years, but actually they're to manually review thousands of contracts, even if you were using AI and various things, sometimes was always too much. Like, it was some of the stuff you would use in the AI tools before always had a bit of a limit. Like, you would always know it wasn't going to be 100%. It always needed a human oversight unless people were prepared to take the risk. We are seeing better accuracy with generative AI tools. Now you can actually say to clients, well, your contracts are sitting on a shared file or sometimes in safes in like paper form, and we know you want them digitalized, and that just wasn't possible before, but now we can probably make that more possible. And I think that sometimes happens when an event is happening, when you're selling, when you want to refinance or something like that. Actually, can you be proactive now with some of those pieces of work because it's more possible? So that's some of the things that we're starting to see.
That's really interesting. Are you starting to find yourself providing new services then?
So yeah, offering, like, we, even before generative AI, with our AI tools we had before, we had one client, for example, who had 50,000 documents in a shared file, and they just never touched it. Like, they didn't like it because they would have to go in and search for it whenever they needed anything, but they never had the data from it. What we agreed with them was a bit of a spot check, but actually use the AI tools to give them the data. And in some ways, that's a slightly different service. You have, like I said, different conversations about liability and risk when it comes to that. And we're starting to see that. And actually, we're starting to see it be used quite a bit, like at the start of matters, but we're seeing it in litigation as well. That's really helping that set what you're going to do with the deal, because actually you can get some information quite quickly to then go, what's the strategic direction of where we need to focus? So actually, we've done the reviews of the contracts and we're seeing a problem here that we maybe wouldn't have seen if we hadn't reviewed those contracts in the first place. So those are some of the things that we're starting to see.
It sounds like such an opportunity as well to become more embedded with your client as well, because if you're kind of saying, some of the systems and the tools that they use, if you could do things as part of your legal engagement that are then going to continue to add value, it's not a one-off transaction. It's everything's sitting here. If you need some further advice, maybe systems are a little more integrated with the client, or there's an easier way to provide that conversation back and forth. Really interesting conversation I had in the US with a partner who was asking the question. He does predominantly, but he was really interested on the data side about, like, we know that so many deals fail. Ultimately, once the the acquisition's complete, a lot do fail due to post-merger elements. And some of those things could have been discovered, say, in diligence, or there are things that could have happened and you add value there. Using data, is there a way to sort of identify that? Or are there things that we could add further value post-acquisition to be able to increase the likelihood of a successful integration afterward? And it sounds like some of the things that you're discussing, Kerry, do maybe start getting us to a world where we can do that a little bit.
And even things like what is litigated after an acquisition, and actually, is there anything legal normally? So we spend all of this time negotiating certain things and worrying about them, but actually, like you said, where does it fail? And therefore, should we focus more on that? Where should our legal advice be focusing and stuff like that? And I think that's some of the stuff that we're starting to see is possible. I think before, like, you always wanted to do it, but it just wasn't possible. And I think now with some of the tools that we're starting to see, if you're capturing capturing data in a structured way, using tools through a transaction that can be used later on, I think that's really important. It was always just the bit at the end, which was like, well, we now need to integrate this company and we need to do these reviews. And it's like, they were all in a data room when we were doing this. So what could you do? So yeah, I think that's going to be quite interesting.
In terms of just on the client side, different clients have different levels of maturity in terms of their legal operations functions, in terms of how they do approach their external engagements. Are there certain capabilities that you've seen within clients that, more improve the collaboration or innovative approaches than others?
So it's quite interesting because on one hand, those with those client relationship teams, legal ops teams who understand change and want to bring it in and try it into their business are really good like co-conspirators at this and like helping you translate between us and various parts of the business. But then interestingly, there are other clients who don't have any of that, who almost don't care how it's done. They're like, and I listen to clients like at conferences and others that aren't just our clients, other clients out there who are a bit like, when we go to the restrictions piece, they're a bit like, well, I don't put any restrictions because I just want the law firms to do it and want them to do it quickly. And how is it done? Whereas sometimes if you have the bigger relationship management panel type firms, there's more rigor around them, and that can be the prevention. So they're almost like that can be the restrictions. So it's almost like a double-edged sword. But especially in the bigger clients where they can be as big as law firms, the legal ops teams are really, really important. But they can't do it themselves. They have to bring the in-house lawyers along with them as well. And they have to be that translator, because the in-house lawyers are the ones instructing us. The in-house lawyers are the ones that need to know what to ask for. And they need to really understand what it means for their work. A bit like we were saying earlier about my lawyers, AG understanding technology. I think the in-house lawyers need to as well. Because almost this goes to, I think, something you mentioned earlier, Dan, like innovation questions are in the RFP and the panel and the pitches, and then when the actual work happens, it almost gets forgotten sometimes by the clients and by law firms, and it's like, we've just got to get this deal done, and what are we doing? So I think the in-house lawyers need to come along and be saying, when they're instructing or when they're asking for a pitch or response, how are you going to use technology, or what are you doing, and how are you going to do this deal differently, and things like that. So almost like the legal ops teams need to work with their in-house lawyers on that and bring them along as well. So it's a real mix, I think. And like I said, if you have a smaller in-house team, sometimes they're just like, can you just do it? Like, I'm happy you've done all of your InfoSec sort of reviews and various things. I don't really care about the machine at the law firm and how you're doing it. Can you just do the deal? So it's a real difference.
Yeah. Does that not, I mean, if they put it in their RFP, does that not then sort of fall on the law firm to go and do it? Is that...
Partly, but like your RFP, sometimes if it's for the panel, is a bit more generic than then the one-off, like the deal. And in some ways, I feel in the bigger deals and the far more complex deals, it is a little bit easier because you're having really interesting scoping conversations about what's possible and what you're doing. Where I think it becomes quite interesting is the more day-to-day stuff, and you're almost like, people have done the same deals the same way for so long that you just all naturally fall into that again. So I think you have to deliberately go, no, we're going to use this now, and we're gonna do this. And as an in-house team, I want to make sure that's happening, and you as the in-house lawyer probably needs to really care about that.
So on that point, Kerry, because we talked about some of the regulatory barriers where it's like they want to use it, but it's a blocker. But sometimes it's just there's not accountability. Like, you've won the panel appointment saying you use this full suite of technology, or you've presented a great, shiny success story from, a prior deal, and it comes to the deal itself and there's just not the accountability, often on the client side, and maybe it's in the too hard basket on the law firm side to actually do it. How do you think about driving that accountability to actually get the technology used and deployed on deal?
So I'm the firm believer now that you can't really be delivering legal work without using some element of technology or to drive it forward. So internally, it will be questioning that. So if I find out about deals that are happening, like, well, what have we said and how are we using it? And it's quite interesting because we have day-to-day tools that we don't always know are used every day on technology, and people are just, it becomes natural. Like, I don't check up if people are using Outlook or Word on their tools, and actually we've got some tools that are becoming those. But I think it's that consistent, when you then go to relationship meetings, they're asking you, and actually all the lawyers, not just the CRPs, so the client relationship partners, have to be responsible for that. It's like, if we've said we're going to use AI on due diligence, then we need to. I think clients need to question us on that to make sure that it's happening, but we will also do it from our end as well.
And would those relationship partners have that data in their meetings as to what technology is being used?
It's really hard to, well, we all know you're never going to get everyone to fill out the matter numbers on every piece of technology that you're using. It's a little bit of a barrier in putting that information in. So we have a sense that it's happening, and we'd sort of keep an eye on usage and make sure that it's being used. So they won't have the full data, but they will have some of understanding of it.
You have all the different entities, right? So the client is really that bank, but actually you're working for all these different entities or subsidiaries within it. So we did a big piece that lets firms aggregate that so that they can report back at a client level. It's really interesting to start providing data on that and take a little bit of a data-driven approach.
Yeah. It's just making people understand how important it is to capture that data, I think, is the important bit for me. So you can get in this trap of like, if I'm going to open a Legatics tracker on something, I want them to fill out the matter number and what it's for and all of this. And you're almost putting blockers in the way of using it. And that would be really good data to have, but actually I'd rather they were just using it on the thing. So some of that's going to be quite important.
Maybe it's easier for us because we're kind of used on a per matter basis and it's clear that there is a matter, but then there's other technology where it's less clear. And you're saying it's more important to make sure it's used to encourage the use than to put admin in front of everyone.
Yeah.
But the other thing that was it came up in a roundtable, actually, Kerry, I know you were part of that one as well recently, but it was interesting to hear just how few legal technology provider tools do provide good reporting to actually assist in those conversations. And I know it's something that we've invested heavily in on the, a separate admin app that does actually report on all of it. But actually what was coming up in the conversation was it's actually really hard for a lot of the tools to actually get the necessary data to guide those conversations that are important to them demonstrate the value or have the open conversation about it. There was a push to get the vendors to really do that a little bit.
There is, because I think we're now at the place where everyone wants to know more about usage and the impact of it. And I can absolutely see why it's the hard bit, because you want the product to work and you want people to want to use the product. So reporting goes by the wayside, and we've seen that for over a decade. But as tools become more expensive, or we buy more tools, then the ROI piece becomes quite interesting, and the data and the usage piece is really key for us to be able to know that. And there might be some things where you're doing training and you've got test sites, and actually being really able to differentiate between test sites and not test sites, and showing who's using it and all of that type of stuff is quite important. But I can understand why it's always one of the sort of later bits that gets looked at by some tech vendors.
It's really tough, right? You've got to weigh up all the features that are externally facing that are on the roadmap that people want delivered. And then you've got these things that people don't see externally, but is incredibly important to actually, prove out ROI, to show the value. And, and how do you weigh those things up sometimes? Because there are always more features, more things that can be provided in the internally facing aspect and the externally facing.
We've talked a lot about the law firm side. We've talked a lot about the in-house side. If we were to summarize years of experience and today's podcast into a piece of advice for law firms trying to get their clients to actually use more technology with their clients, and a piece of advice for in-house teams who are trying to use more technology with their law firms, what would your advice be?
So for law firms, it's not overpromising, I think, is probably one of the things. And I think it's the hype cycle, isn't it, at the moment? There's a lot of expectation that technology will completely transform. And honestly, we are seeing bits where there is transformation happening and coming, but it's always better to show sort of small, tangible progress and build that trust around that platform and things. That's probably one aspect for me. And the other one is to be brave about it. So it probably does go in contradiction with don't overpromise, but there is so much we could do and could think about. And it's like, let's be brave and let's suggest things to clients and lawyers internally. And if you're in an innovation team, if you've got ideas, then really just make sure that they're out there and you're testing them and having a look at it. And the other bit is to really think about how you communicate the benefits to your clients and your lawyers internally as well. And we need to try and get away from this focus that it just means everything's going to be quicker, cheaper, and things like that. I think it's going to be better and more valuable. So, and how do we have those? And from a client perspective, I think if you're asking your law firms to be innovative and use technology, then let them. and we can work as an ecosystem if we need to try and do that with our vendors and our clients and our law firms. And I know from talking to other people at other law firms, we're all facing the same things and we're all having the same conversations and we're all trying to find the way in to say, we want to be able to use these tools. We are still at a place where, and people don't believe me when I say this sometimes, where we have restrictions on the use of cloud. We literally are. If you're putting terms in your panel terms now around the restrictions on the use of AI, we're going to be caught up in knots for the next decade like we have been with cloud. So really think about how and work with your procurement teams and those, so in-house teams work with procurement teams on what you really want from this and how you're going to use it. Because I think that's, for me, I sometimes feel we're trying to innovate with a hand tied behind our back. If we could unleash some of that, I just think so much more is possible.
Thank you so much, Kerry. I think that brave and practical approach really, really comes across in the way you talk about it. And I can see why that's showing you so much success in the market. So a really, really big thank you for talking to us today. It's always an absolute pleasure to spend time and chat. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Kerry.